although outstanding as it was with those battles I just mentioned in 1777, he distinguished himself also with the Battle of Monmouth in 78. And then, of course, as Lou said, in Yorktown, he led one of the brigades to take out redoubt number 10, I believe it was, one of the crucial redoubts that
That paved the
crumbled
way for that
Cornwallis
paved the
and
way.
led to the surrender of
Right.
Cornwallis's army.
Exactly.
There were a number of Continental Army veterans who had some significant chops because of what they did in the war, but that wouldn't land them a number 4 of the founding fathers. So that's only step number 1 for Mr. Hamilton.
Exactly.
So he was a New York attorney and was in law practice. He was in the Continental Congress from 1782 to 1783. In 1784, he assisted in the founding of the Bank of New York, one of the first banks in the country, and that was in operation for 2 centuries until 2007, when it merged with, I think, Carnegie Mellon or Mellon.
Yeah.
So now it's like Bank of New York Mellon.
Right.
Still ongoing. He founded the New York Post, which is still ongoing.
Well,
And
we'll give him a pass on that.
well, you know,
Yeah. No. But anyway,
in
yes.
1785, not many people know, he assisted in the founding of the New York Society for promoting what they called then, this is 18th century language, the New York Society for promoting manumission of slaves, meaning the release of slaves. He was an abolitionist. And this was also some of the friction we had talked about with the Washington and the Adams number 1 and number 2 founding father episodes we talked about. And in Washington's cabinet, there's Hamilton with Jefferson, and Hamilton ribbed him publicly a lot, saying, you're the guy, writes about all these freedoms and, all men are created equal. Yet, then you get the whip
right.
out and whip all these slaves. How do you reconcile the two? So he and Jefferson were not always on, Hallmark card buddies. So,
but just to just sort of take a look at this all, and just at this point, and we're just talking at this point, as he begins, as he starts out as, his political career, goes through the Constitutional Convention, or goes to the Continental Convention first, because then he also becomes a representative at the Constitutional Convention at a later point in time. That you have somebody that now is in their mid-20s, early 30s, uneducated bastard child who, that he starts from nothing and is now one of the leading members of New York society. A well-established attorney, well-respected, well-read, establishes a bank, establishes all these other things on his way to becoming, eventually, as we'll talk about, a main part of the cabinet, Washington cabinet, a main member of the Constitutional Convention, and again, the lead writer of the Federalist Papers, which will, and as Rob and I talked about before we got on the air here today, for people that think that the U.S. is divided now, that if you go back in time and you look at the time during the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, I don't think you have a more bodies that disagree with each other on such a fundamental, absolute fundamental basis as this. It was a significant divide between the colonies, where the Anti-Federalists believed in a very weak central government. You had many of the northern states that wanted it in one way. The southern states wanted it a different way. And it's the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And it was really because of Hamilton and the articles that he wrote in the Federalist Papers, and that he eventually, as Secretary of the Treasury and a member of Washington's cabinet, implemented a lot of these things.
But again, war hero, does all the stuff with the Continental Congress, founds the Bank of New York, assistant goes with this abolitionist society, and then he becomes one of the delegates, as Lou said, to the Continental Convention. Now, New York, the state of New York, was not in favor of the Constitution. His base was the agrarian, and people think of New York today like all you think is skyline and this and whatever big cities, whether it's New York City or Rochester or Buffalo or whatever. New York in
what you say about
1780. I'm just saying, Buffalo was nothing wrong with Buffalo. Buffalo is wonderful. Just saying. The state really was an agrarian-led
Right.
state. And he didn't, the uppity aristocrats in New York City, he didn't pander to. His base was the agrarian part of the state. And they wanted state rights. They felt that the Constitution, the tariffs that would be collected from the port of New York would go to the federal government. And they said, no, we want this money to ourselves. Most states sent a panel of, or delegates of 5. When pressed, the governor sent 3. He sent Hamilton because he was so persistent, but he sent 2 others to negate Hamilton's vote who were completely against, who were anti-federalists. But Hamilton went anyway. And he pushed and he pushed and he pushed. And as Lou said, not only did he push, how did he push? There's records of him giving a 6-hour speech. For F's sake, he did 51 out of the 85 essays that became the Federalist Papers.
He published these articles and would basically argue the same things to the delegates there. And then all of a sudden the delegates would see the same thing written in the Federalist Papers and be like, holy shit, this guy knows what he's talking about. Not realizing that he was really one and the same, and really carried the day on a lot of different issues that were the close issues.
Right.